tech, historically, the tech sector has been the kind of fastest growing, most innovative, most progressive part of B2B marketing. Do you think that's still the case, or do you think other sectors, like professional services, for example, have caught up and there's more of a level playing field these days?
I think the beauty of the tech industry is it's got a permanent supply of startups coming in at the bottom, right? Which are typically trying to push the envelope. I mean, I had the epiphany I had with marketing automation was when I worked for a 150-person startup company where I could use Marketo to really help scale up our operation and do it at little or with some tools very no cost.
And this was like in 2007 when marketing automation was still relatively unknown,
Yeah, well at the time I was Marketo's first non-US customer.
There we go, right.
And that's because I had a very progressive CEO, and of course I was, well, we might talk about sort of networking, but I was well connected with people in the industry and sort of say, hey, does anyone recommend a tool that could help? And that's how I got to Marketo. So it was really through the network that I built, and that's why I still try to keep my network, because that's where you get a lot of your great insights on best practice. So there's another thing that's happened to B2B tech is we've had the halo effect of consumer marketing kind of really sink itself in now into it. I've worked in some businesses who have naturally had a consumer business, and we've benefited from that thinking sort of bleeding into the B2B side, so Adobe and Microsoft and others. I think now, it's more that the buyer has changed and the way in which our buyers want to operate, and that's totally changed to be much more digitally led, being accelerated by the pandemic. So I think B2B tech as well is something, depending on the company, that can also be bought frictionless, no touch, low touch, and services often are not quite like that. But I think there's a lot we can learn from on the services side around things like high-end account-based marketing, kind of deal marketing, the way they think about customizing a story for an individual customer. There's a lot of things they do there, and they're people businesses, so they're very much about positioning their business, their people, and their values, and that's, as we know, is also very important to B2B buyers. But I think you can't beat that steady stream of startups coming in and trying to nip at people's heels and be a bit more innovative in that perspective.
I think they make a very good point there. I think, and both in terms of the challenges, the opportunities faced enabled by tech, and specifically professional services and the inherent obstacles it faces. But from a pure creative point of view, there was this period where, you and I can remember a time, in the kind of late noughties where B2B creative was very challenged, very rigid, very boring, very inhuman. Do you think the standard is more? Do you think more companies, more sectors have got it now, and there's more of a humanity creeping, or do you think there's still some way to go?
I think all these things are generational. So I think, in the sense that it takes not a generation, but a period of generation, like a decade, for these things to change. I don't think it's over. I don't think there's necessarily consistent best practice, across all of B2B now, and everyone is doing wonderfully creative, interesting stuff. And of course, I'm sure we'll talk about AI and then how that might start to dumb down things again at the sake of efficacy, to get things out quickly and so on. So I still think there's work that we need to do, and I think there's still scope for people to stand out in the crowd. So,
which is good news, because there isn't, as you say, people can still do great work and be recognised for it and be successful for it. So
I think it's creativity is definitely in the fabric of B2B marketing now. So I definitely think it's part of the conversation, whereas it wasn't really a thing. It was a sort of, we had a functional job to do to tell a story about, and almost just getting our company and our product to someone was the goal. And it didn't matter, I wouldn't say how we did it, but there wasn't so much thought around that creativity. I think now it's something that we think about. So that's definitely changed. The mindset in most B2B marketers now, I think we think about creativity in what we do. And I think we just naturally, that generational thing as well, is we're naturally more imbued with, social media platforms, the way in which content is now distributed. And I think that just, again, in our personal lives are more exposed to it. I mean, I remember, when you're talking about that period, the companies that were really good at creativity were really, rare in taking inspiration from, consumer marketing or we're looking at, I can't remember what was around there, Twitter or Instagram or whatever was around at the time. And I remember telling members of the team, hey, do you have an Instagram account? Or do you have why don't you try it and have a look and then maybe report back in if there's anything you've seen and, okay, right, I'll have Instagram. And now, of course, everyone does. So I think it's naturally more in our DNA. So I think that's a good thing.
I agree. It's fascinating, that process. It's great to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. I don't think it's the thing we need to tell people about, but now how do we move the conversation on, to be relevant in terms of the impact it makes, the difference it makes.